Thank you very much, Tom. I appreciate that.
Aprecio mucho lo que acabas de decir.
I'm very humbled by having had this invitation. As that brief bio showed, I don't know anything about wheat. I do know a little bit about rice, but when the invitation came, I thought, well, I really should come to Ciudad, come to Obregon, and it's been a great experience. Tom asked me for perspectives about what the world would look like in 2050 and what that means for agricultural research and development. So I'm going to try to address that issue. You saw something like this earlier. This jaggedy line here shows the course of world commodity prices, agricultural commodity prices, starting in 1970 and going through to 2013. And you see there have been several episodes of high prices, notably in the 70s, and then again in the 80s and the 90s, and most recently 2008. It is the nature of world food prices that they do this. And we can talk about why and episodes and so forth, and we'll come back. I'm going to talk about this period, recent period, a little bit more later. But I want to draw attention to the downward trend in real food prices over this long period. I also want to draw attention to an even longer period of time. The chart here shows years of life expectancy. And in Europe, North America, Africa, Asia, in 1800, life expectancy everywhere was in the range of 30 years, 25 to 35 years. Between 1800 and 1960, in the so-called developed countries, life expectancies increased to about 70 years, whereas in Africa and Asia, they were stuck back at around 35 to 40 years. They did increase a little bit, but not very much. If you look at what's happened, or what happened in the 40 years, the 50 years since then, you see that Africa and Asia have caught up, basically caught up in life expectancy. So we've seen progress over the long run, and we've seen progress in the last half century. And so while we've seen progress, we know that there are still some 800 million to a billion people undernourished in the world today. And this chart shows a graphic representation of what that undernourishment does in terms of deaths of children under 5. These are all causes. These are nutrition-related causes of death from pneumonia, diarrhea, measles, other infections. Undernutrition is a major contribution to the deaths of millions, hundreds of millions. And that is the thing on which many of us are focused. That is caused by poverty, and it's caused by undernutrition. And the question is, how can that be overcome? So if I ask, what will the world look like in 2050? Will there be enough food, and what should agricultural research do? I take my text from, some of you may recognize, at least most of you should recognize this little symbol up here, the logo for the New York Yankees. And some of you will recognize this guy who said it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. He's the philosopher of many New Yorkers, and I think we are well to recognize what Yogi said. So, but Ronnie Kaufman says economists never shirk from talking about things about which they know nothing. And so, Ronnie, wherever you are, I got to forge ahead here. When you start to look at the literature about futures, it's staggering. This is one representation from the Millennium Project that outlines 15 global challenges facing humanity. I think number one up there is sustainable development and climate change, by which they mean agriculture, right? That's the problem that's facing agriculture, or the environment in which agriculture operates. As you go around to the right, clean water, population, democratization, but the mass of problems is intimidating. And the CGIAR, of course, is every good organization recognizes there's a futures problem, and so they have a futures project. I think one or two people in the room probably were at this meeting. I didn't ask them what they found out or what they think about the future because I didn't want to distort my thinking. But I think that the world in 2050, we know there will be more people. And we know that it will be more crowded, more polluted, on average hotter and drier. It'll be better connected, if that's possible. There'll be more volatile weather, probably. There'll be more volatile prices, for sure. And on average, it'll be wealthier, but probably more unequal. And so will global agriculture keep up? Well, from time to time, we have these crises, and the result of the crisis is that agriculture's not doing its job, agriculture's not keeping up, and the world is going to die. We're all going to die. Well, we are all going to die. The most recent of these events was in 2008, the big spike in world commodity prices that you can see here. And world commodity prices, I've got oil, maize, rice, wheat, and urea on this chart. They tripled or quadrupled, and then we see that since then, they've come back. At the present time, they're about double what they were prior to 2008. The global corn price is now around $200. The expectations from FAO and the USDA are that they will go somewhat lower. Of course, it depends on the exact of the crop this year, and other commodity prices follow along. So this is in a period when biofuels were very important in increasing the demand, and a number of other things were happening. So on the demand side, we know what drives global agricultural demand. It's the demand for food, the demand for energy, and the demand for ecosystem services. In the industrialized countries, the demand for food is basically flat. Population growth rates are quite slow, and people are eating more food than they need, and so that aspect of demand is flat. But growth there is driven by increasing demand for energy and ecosystem services, or a better environment. So a better environment means that agriculture has to produce more with less, so that land is left for environmental services. The impact of those forces on the developing world depends on how well connected they are, depends on really globalization. Countries that are very well integrated in the world economy are impacted by those things. But the major driving force on the demand side is from developing countries. And there, it's largely the demand for food, as you all know. And that depends on the growth in population, growth in income, and changes in preferences over time. Population, I would venture to say that most people in the room believe that population is the big challenge for future food. I want to say that I don't think that's the case. And the reason I don't think that's the case is shown here. This chart shows the total fertility rates. That's the number of children each woman has on average. And if you look, you see this very steep decline in total fertility rates in Latin America, Asia, and the world. that took place between 1970 and 2010. And this, I believe, is consistent with what Norm Borlaug said when he said that the Green Revolution would give us 20 or 30 years of breathing space. We've had that 20 or 30 years. During that time, because incomes have grown in Asia and Latin America. Stress that, because incomes have grown in Asia and Latin America, population growth rates have gone down. That's what causes population growth to slow down, is higher incomes. And a lot of that income growth in Asia was generated in agriculture, in the agricultural sector. What I also want to stress, however, is that population growth rates are coming down in Africa as well. They're still quite a bit higher. The challenge is no doubt there. Africa is the challenge of the day. It's a challenge of the future. But those population growth rates are coming down as well. This is total fertility. This shows the actual population growth rates, exactly the same pattern. So that I do not believe that population growth per se is going to challenge the capacity of the world to grow food. A calculation of how much more food would be needed is summarized here. As you know, the population projections are normally shown as a low rate, a medium rate, and a high rate by the people who do this in the United Nations. And the highlighted squares here show the amount, or the index of production demand that would be required relative to the year 2000. So if we focus on the medium, which is here, in 2025, we need 31% more food to feed the world's population at the same level. In 2050, we need 50% more food to feed the population at the same level. But it's not just population growth, as the bottom part of the chart shows. It's all of the other demand that comes from income, from energy, from environment, all of these things. A very good analyst, Luther Tweeten, a colleague, has analyzed this stuff, and I've just taken his numbers. So another good colleague says that these numbers are too high. I'm sure there are others who would say they're too low, but I'm blaming it on Luther. I think he's done a good job here. And again, looking at the median population growth conflated with income and other factors, by 2025, we need 43% more food, more agricultural production, and by 2050, 79%. So this is the number that's often quoted. We need 80% more food, more agricultural production by 2050 than we have today. I've seen that a lot of places. I think I'm breaking the pointer, but I hope it'll still work. I think it's the kind of the consensus view. Focus for a minute, though, on the 2025 number. This 143 means that we need 43% more agricultural output in 2025 than we had in the year 2000. I took a look at what has been achieved, and it's summarized here. In the world today, according to our friends at FAO, who keep track of this stuff, total agriculture, food, cereals, livestock, these are index numbers. So on an index basis of 2004 to 6, we had 10% increase in that period. In the next few years, we had another 8% increase. Then there was 15% increase in 2010 compared to 2004. So in total, from the year 2000 to the year 2011, take a 3-year average, we had 28% increase in agricultural production. And remember I said that from up till 2025, we need a 43%. So we're doing pretty good. We're almost at 30%. You look at food production, it's the same thing. Cereals a little bit less, livestock a little bit less, but other commodities are coming along. Oilseeds is one of them. So we haven't done too badly. But of course, there are areas that lag behind. And I thought to myself, well, surely in Africa, Africa is lagging behind. So I've got the numbers for Africa at the bottom of this chart. Here's the world. And we can look at the percentage increase over the 12-year period from 2000 to 2012. 28% for the world, 40% for Africa. Africa's increased its food production, 42% increase in food production over the period. So why do we always look at Africa? Well, as you saw from the earlier chart, population growth rates in Africa are still substantially above other areas. And so per capita food production in Africa is not increasing. But just total output is doing very well. It's doing better than the global average. So if we look at global food production, if we look at what the market is calling forth and what the market is disposing of, we see that, well, we're doing pretty well. I mean, we're almost to what we need for 2025. I want to focus on the 800 million people who aren't getting enough food, who we know are undernourished. And I want to argue that it's not an issue of not enough food in the world. The problem is poor people don't get enough food. I'm illustrating it here by contrasting pairs of countries, Bangladesh and India, Haiti and Dominican Republic, Malawi and South Africa. And I'm not trying to point out any particular country, but just to illustrate. And I've used these countries as kind of pairs of low-income inadequate diets and low-income adequate diets. And at the bottom, summarized rough levels of consumption. If you have cassava consumption in a low-income inadequate diet, you're eating a lot of cassava, 50 kgs per year, 100 kgs of maize on average, 190 rice, 10 wheat, some beans, fruits and vegetables 50, and meat maybe 2. A slightly higher income level, somewhat higher income level, we can argue about words, but your cassava consumption is way down. Your direct maize consumption is down. Rice is down a little bit. Wheat is about up a little bit. And vegetables and fruits and meat are up. So this is kind of the nutritional transition that countries go through from a really low-income, inadequate diet up to slightly higher income, somewhat higher income, but during that transition, a much more adequate diet. So I asked the question, well, we have these, and let's say the 800 million people are characterized at this low-income, inadequate diet. They have that or less. So they are lower than that. And so I asked the question, well, what would we have to do? How much food do we have to produce in order to raise those 800 million people up to a low-income but somewhat more adequate level? Here, I just grouped it into starchy staples, fruits and vegetables, beans and legumes, meat, and a total in grain equivalent. So I took the consumption, and we'd go down on starchy staples, we'd go up on fruits and vegetables by 75, maybe stayed level on beans, up on meat, and then converted that using rough conversion ratios of things that you can argue with me about. Down here, 1, 3 for fruits and vegetables, 2 on beans, 5 to 8 on meat. And I came up with 236 to 268 million metric tons additional cereal equivalent. So that's the equivalent.
Es el equivalente.
That's roughly
Eso es más
5.8 to 6.1% more
más
than current global production.
de lo que se está
So 6 to,
actualmente.
we can call it 6 to 10%.
6 a 10%.
So we need 6 to 10% more food production to meet the needs of the 800 million people who are currently underfed.
Millones de personas que están actualmente.
I would submit, however,
Sin embargo,
that I believe the world can produce that relatively easily.
eso realmente
If we look at the fluctuations, we see fluctuations within that range.
dentro de este rango.
The challenge is
Reto es
that in addition to
más
meeting that additional 5 to 8% or 6 to 10%, I say here,
necesario para los 800 millones.
the poor need food entitlements. They need to have a way to get that food.
Forma de poder obtener
We've seen an announcement in India of making food a right, and government statement that they will ensure that everybody gets food. That's a food entitlement. If everybody gets it, they will have a food entitlement, and hunger will be abolished in India. Brazil some years ago undertook a determination, something like this, and they've done a very good job. In Mexico, they've taken a little different. There are different ways to ensure that people get these food entitlements. But in order for hunger to be overcome, it's not adequate to produce enough food. People need to have entitlements.
las personas necesitan
We heard a lot, and we're going to hear in the next session something more about the need for national governments to undertake the right set of policies. I mentioned 3 countries in which they are changing policies. The need for national governments to take action, to be determined, to have the political will. I wanted to focus in on
enfocar
the role of agriculture research in addressing that need for food entitlements.
para
Now, what can agriculture research do?
pueden hacer
And I think we need to certainly continue increasing the productivity of the main crops like rice and especially wheat, maize. We need to raise the productivity of crops that are grown by the poor. I read a really interesting paper about chickpea in Andhra Pradesh, where productivity had increased. We heard about Ethiopia case. There are cases. We need to continue to raise the productivity of those crops. I'm going to say we need to increase the need for hired labor. Poor people hire their labor. In rural areas, they hire out. They work for farmers. Farmers don't want to hire them because they have to pay them labor, and they have to pay them wages. And we hear a lot about the labor shortage in rural areas. But that is the livelihood of landless people. We have to certainly improve the stability of production, and we have to reduce the risk of price gyrations. So these are some things that I think agriculture research can contribute to. On the last, I want to draw your attention to this chart, which shows maize production in Malawi. And when Howard talked about parachuting in with fertilizer, I thought that was the perfect lead-in to this slide, because Howard, each one of these peaks is a parachute, a program here, an inputs program that was changed, another input program here that was modified, it was done away with, another input program here. Most of the change here is, yeah, we see a drought year, but most of the change here is due to government policies, in part driven by, permitted by parachutes from London or New York or Washington with money in the parachute for subsidizing fertilizer, or, sorry, we can't do that anymore, that's not a good policy. Major cause of problems. If you look back on that chart, it illustrates that smallholders, the only people basically that produce maize in Malawi are smallholders. They are quite ready to use fertilizer, and when they do, they increase their maize production. It's not a problem. The other thing it shows, though, is that despite the last years there really is no trend What we're doing is we're wiggling around 1.5 tons per hectare. 1.5 tons per hectare is way below the potential with fertilizer and with the seeds that we have. We've got good seeds for Southern Africa. But these soils are so exhausted, and these farmers have so little ongoing incentive to practice sustainable practices that they will not have a trend. We're not seeing a trend as we see a trend in many other cases. So what are we going to have to do to get them on a trend? And I think agriculture research can contribute to that, but we need to change it. And let me just, I'm going to have to cut my quote, but these are the kinds of changes we need. We need a more balanced research agenda. I know there are a lot of geneticists and pathologists in the room. I respect you immensely, but we need to balance the agenda with a little more on-station and on-farm research, research by farmers and facilitators. We need more balance, and in particular, we need balance along the whole continuum of generating, incorporating, disseminating, and translating new knowledge to farmers. And since we're in one of the international centers, I want to particularly emphasize the change to more crop management research, discovering appropriate legumes, the seed systems to deliver appropriate legumes, the timing issues, the methods issues, livestock crop systems, micronutrient deficiencies, market issues, whole set of issues that have to do with how to grow these new varieties, how to produce them. Move beyond international public goods. That's been the mantra of international agriculture for a long time. And I believe there's a need for the international system to assist national programs to do more in this area. Incorporate, disseminate, translate new knowledge, especially in this crop management systems. That will enable us to obtain more of the genetic potential that's built into the varieties that are being produced and that are out there. So, just a last word. We need more effective systems for doing the whole set of things. I think a few things said about NGOs in the last session. I think there's an opportunity for scientists to work with NGOs. Most NGOs are staffed by people who don't know much science, who don't know much agriculture. But that doesn't mean that they don't have the same or very similar objectives as you all have. So I'm going to say thank you very much. What is needed? What do yogis say? When you come to a fork in the road, take it. So thank you very much.